So now we get to watercoloring with Tombow markers. And this is a great way, if you already have Tombow markers and are using them for other techniques, this is a great way to see if watercoloring is your cup of tea or if it's not. So I'm going to use Stays On ink. It is a permanent ink, so when I use the water with the watercoloring, it is not going to go anywhere. Oh, I actually just touched my stamp, so it might affect that, but it's okay. So again, holding the center to keep everything steady and then pressing around the outside. There we go. Now I typically, again, wait 5 minutes or so for this to completely dry. It does dry quite quick, so it's probably dry within a minute or so, but I have one here that I stamped earlier and is definitely good and dry. So the one thing to keep in mind when watercoloring with Tombows is you want to make sure that you are using bright colors. This is the color of this marker if I color directly to the paper. If I scribble onto plastic, which is how we watercolor with Tombows, and pick up that ink, it's significantly lighter. Even the darkest part of that color is lighter than its original shade. So you want to make sure that you're choosing brighter colors, because like for instance this really light gray here, when I go to color on paper it is that color. When I go to paint it, it is really pale. The other thing that you can do if you want is you can emboss your image and then stamp or color the embossed image. I did this just to show you what the difference looks like between the two. This one is stamped and embossed. This one is just stamped with Stays On and then watercolored. If you have an image where you want to keep everything precise within the lines, you want to make sure the shading stays within the lines, the embossed version is the way to go. However, again, this particular stamp is very fluid and loose, so we don't need to worry too much, in my opinion, about keeping everything pristine. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my light pink. I scribble onto, this is a non-porous matte. It's not going to absorb my ink, and it's just going to be a palette for me to pick it up and then watercolor. This paper that I'm working on is watercolor paper. You could use mixed media paper. Again, you want to make sure that you're using a paper that can handle the moisture and isn't going to warp and bubble with that. And I'm just going to quickly do my lightest pink on all the colors that I'm using it on. And then I'm going to do my darker pink. And you can see every single time I go to scribble it on my mat, I'm going in a different area. I'm not going to scribble over top of where I've got beads of water, because that is going to just dilute my ink even more. I've got a paper towel here to tap my brush on between colors to clean it. Not super necessary with the pink, just because I wouldn't contaminate anything if I put the color in there. But if you're changing colors, like when I go to green or when I go to yellow, you definitely want to make sure to change and clean your brush between. The other thing to keep a note of is when you're working with watercolor paper, typically it has a bit of a texture to it, but the mixed media paper, at least the ones that I have gotten, don't have that texture. So if you're wanting to work on a smoother paper, you would either choose a watercolor paper that doesn't have the texture or a mixed media paper. For this, it doesn't really make too much difference. My stamped image didn't really get affected by it, but sometimes, and you'll notice it with some of the cards later on, when I go to stamp an image, the image is a little bit more solid, so you notice that texture a little bit more. All right, so that pink is done. And I'm using my paper towel to just clean my mat off so that I know that I don't have bits of ink in the way. And I typically am coloring with the side of my marker. When I'm coloring the color, putting the color on the mat, it's just going to give more color or lay more color onto the mat for me to use, which means I'm going to have to squiggle on there a little bit less. I'm just tapping this light pink or this dusty rose color on here. I don't necessarily want brush strokes, but I just want a little bit of a touch of pink in there. If I wanted, I could use one of the pinks that are in my roses, but I'm trying to keep them a little bit different. So let's go with the lightest green first for the leaves. Like I said, this is a great way to check and see if you like watercoloring. Not every single technique is for everyone. Some people prefer some things and others prefer others. There's no right or wrong. But if you have the Tombow markers and are using them with different techniques, it's a great way to just test and see if watercoloring is your cup of tea. And I like this brush that I have. I like having the water in the handle and being able to just touch it onto paper towel if it's too wet, or to squeeze it onto paper towel if I want to change my color, because I tend to be a little bit of a klutz, and having an open bottle of water on my desk, chances are I'd knock it. So it's a great way to keep things neat and tidy, as well as the fact that it makes it quite portable. Very easy to take a little piece of plastic, take your markers, take the little water brush and some paper towel, as well as your stamped image, and then, you know, take it somewhere and paint. Take it on vacation if you happen to be traveling somewhere and want a little bit of a creative outlet while you're there. Doesn't require a whole lot of supplies. And I'm just touching some of these up again because I noticed the dark part isn't really very dark on here. So by just tapping it on, it tends to get a little tiny bit darker. Oh, I missed that row of leaves there completely. There we go. And then just like my colored version, I like to put light gray behind my images. For me, it makes it stand out a little bit. It doesn't necessarily have to be light gray. It could be light blue. It could be whatever color you want. It's one of those things you don't see a whole lot, but I think it just makes it pop out a little bit more. You could choose a little bit darker gray or a darker color if you wanted to be able to see it more. You do have to re-ink the palette a little bit more often with this though, because it does, because it's such a light colored gray, it does tend to, something's sticking in there. It does tend to get too light if I don't recolor my palette often enough. And you'll see that while I do this, I'm working from the image and then I work my way out. So I'll start at the image and then I squiggle my way out, mainly because the color gets lighter as I squiggle out and I want the darkest part underneath the image there. All right, I'm not going to finish this one because you can see what I'm doing. This one here is completely done and it's very, very subtle. Like I said, if you wanted it to be more in your face, you could choose a color that's a little bit darker. There's so many different grays. I think there's like 8 different color grays. So you could choose one that's a little bit darker. And then for this one, I chose to just choose a pale yellow instead of the pink. Neither is right or wrong. I just wanted you to see what the difference was. It just kind of changes what your focal point of your card is. So I'll see you in the next video.